Brett McKay here, and welcome to another edition of the Art of Manliness podcast. Now, a question we've attempted to answer on the Art of Manliness is, what is manliness? And as our guest points out today in the podcast, that is one of the hardest, easy questions to answer, because I think a lot of people think they know what it is, they have an idea of what it is, but when pressed to give an answer, they fumble a lot and they can't come up with something articulate or concise. But our guest today, in his new book, sets out to give a universal definition of manliness. His name is Jack Donovan. He is the author of the book, The Way of Men. And in today's podcast, we're going to talk about what is the way of men, what is manliness, and he's also going to share what he thinks are the universal tactical virtues of manliness. Really interesting discussion, so stay tuned. All right, well, Jack Donovan, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
All right, so your book, The Way of Men, came out about 2 years ago. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think a little less than that.
A little less than that. Well, I mean, it's one of the better books on masculinity that I've read. What I loved about it is that it challenges you. You're not going to agree with everything, but you force the reader to question their assumptions about things. And I had mental debates with you while I was reading, and even my wife read the book, and she thought it was great too. And we'd have these okay, what did he mean by that? So kudos for that, for writing a challenging book like that.
Thanks.
All right, so I'm going to start off by asking you a question that you asked me in writing this book, The Way of Men, because I think it sets up what The Way of Men is about. So you asked me this question. I thought at the time I thought it was super insightful, and I still think it's a really insightful question. It is, what's the difference between being a good man and being good at being a man? So what is the difference between being a good man and being good at being a man?
Well, yeah, that seems to have ended up being one of the big takeaways from the book, that people, I think it's a really good separation. And basically, the whole project of The Way of Men was to develop a universal definition of masculinity. And it seems like the question, what is masculinity, is the hardest easy question for most men to answer. And I wanted to try to answer it. And as I listened to the other answers that men gave, I began to realize they were actually having two different conversations. And on one hand, they're talking about morality and about the moral virtues they attributed to men. And on the other hand, they're talking about something else, something older, something more primal. What it means to be a good man changes with religion and ideology. It changes a lot from society to society. It changes if you're a Muslim. It changes if you're a pagan, an atheist. It changes if you're a capitalist or a communist. It changes if you're rich or poor. But I wanted to react to something else. I think we react to something else when we talk to other men and we just kind of are in their presence. And I think we identify it as manliness, and I wanted to figure out what that is. And so I think we can look at a man and have a reaction to him, and no matter what his culture or social class he comes from, and get a sense of what being manly is. And you can have this really good guy, a really nice guy who does all the right things, and he maybe doesn't come off as being manly at all. And then you can also have a man who is a real jerk and still recognize him as manlier than the good guy. One of the questions that people like from the book is Darth Vader unmanly? And if you like Batman and you think he's doing the right thing, does that mean that Bane is unmanly? And I don't really think that you can say Bane is really unmanly and be honest with yourself. So I wanted to figure out what else was there. What are we reacting to? In The Way of Men, I wanted to figure out what we recognize in men as manliness, whether they're good men or bad men, morally speaking. When we think about being a man, and I mean being good at being a man, outside of morality or religion or political ideology, I came to the conclusion that we're identifying traits that in other men that would make them more successful in a survival situation. Being good at being a man has a high value to us today because it had a high value to our ancestors as they were struggling to survive. Men who were stronger or more athletic, men who were strategically smarter, men who were more skillful, more daring, more adept at doing the things that were required specifically of men who were fighting to survive, they were going to be idolized by other men, followed by other men, emulated by other men. And we still do that with sports heroes, for instance, though sadly most of us only seem to do that with warriors if they are actors playing warriors in a movie. So whether we're talking about being good men or bad men, however we define who is good or bad, I think that being good at being a man is about demonstrating and embodying the qualities that would have made our primal ancestors valuable members of a fighting group. In the way of men, I called those qualities tactical values, or tactical virtues, strength, courage, mastery, and honor.
So I love that point, because like I think you're onto something, because I've recognized that too. Like there's like guys that I necessarily don't think they're good guys, but like I'm like, man, that guy is really manly. Like that guy is masculine. He's got some sort of energy or thumos about him that just like exudes like that. I want to be like that guy in some ways, even though he's not that good of a dude.
Yeah.
And I think, I guess you're right. You're hitting on the nail. So being good at being a man is sort of this primal masculinity, what made our ancestors successful as men thousands of years ago. Yeah. And so, okay, you talk about these tactical virtues, honor, strength, mastery, courage. So how did you decide on these four? I mean, was it, you alluded to that it's, these are the virtues or attributes that made men successful, but how did you determine that those were the ones? Was it through research or reading or just thinking about it? What was it?
Well, I think a lot of it's a thought problem. I mean, I started kind of breaking things into categories. And, when you talk about masculinity, and men talk about this all the time, it becomes, is this masculine? Is this not masculine? Is this manly? Is this not manly? And this is the ongoing debate forever and ever. Yeah. And I wanted to try and figure out how do you answer that? And that how do you answer, is this manly? Is this unmanly? And, at first, I looked at the qualities that make men most different from most women. And that's an important way to say that, because differences between the sexes aren't about absolutes. They're about majority trends. It's like the easiest one is strength. Men are stronger than women. Every man is not stronger than every woman, but most men are stronger than most women. So strength is a defining characteristic of men, whether you're talking about good men or bad men. And stronger men have a higher value in a survival group than weaker men. The idea that men should be strong still comes from that. It's not, people want to make it like it's some kind of arbitrary social programming that we get from the media. And, I think it's much, much older and much deeper than that. And, the same thing with courage. Men tend to be willing to take more risks than women. It gets us into a lot of trouble today. That's why, men are pulled over more for speeding and all kinds of things. But, it's a good thing for a group, if not always for the individual, in a primal band of hunters and fighters. You need people who are willing to take risks and spear that angry boar. Yeah. So, I go into obviously deeper explanations for all the virtues in the book. We don't really have time to get into all that now. So, if your listeners want to check that out, that'd be cool.
Sure. I thought mastery was a really interesting one, because I wouldn't have thought that. But what do you mean by that? Kind of just briefly.
Well, it was just kind of a missing hole in the puzzle. As I was trying to put together these virtues, a mastery, without some kind of mastery, strength and courage are kind of ridiculous. Yeah. They don't, unless you're competent, you can be as strong and daring as possible, but, you're not really going to achieve anything. And I think that that's something that men judge each other on constantly and very harshly. Mm-hmm. And, not to disparage women, but, when you talk to, I think women are much more comfortable being like, oh my God, I'm totally not good at that. Yeah. Whereas men want to be good at everything. Yeah. They want to be good at, they don't want to admit they aren't good at things. And I think that that's the reason, is because, men judge each other by how good they are at doing the job that they need to do.
Yeah. I thought it was interesting in my research about the history of bachelorhood in the United States. Like in the 1600s, like you weren't considered a man unless people thought of you as being a master. And not necessarily meant like being having slaves, but like you had mastery of yourself, mastery of life. Like you had your stuff together. You can contribute to society. And so, yeah, when I read that, then I read your section, like, wow, that's a really good insight that you got there. And we've kind of lost that idea of men, valuing men for their mastery in a particular skill set or whatever. Because we really don't talk about that much anymore in today's society.
No, at least not using those words.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that we all look at a guy who really has his stuff together.
Yeah.
And we're like, I want to be more like that.
And in talking to you mentioned how sometimes we think of these virtues or these tactical virtues as these like social conditioning, and I think it is really primal because it's still like even today, even though we might not place an emphasis as a society on these attributes or these virtues, like people or men get really touchy if you like call them weak or you say they're a chicken or they're yellow, right? They get, I mean. Even if the most not very manly guy will still kind of that stings for some reason.
Coward is a fighting word.
Yeah.
It's still a fighting word for men, and it's not something that I think women really react to. Like, what?
Yeah.
Coward? Okay.
No.
But yeah, for men, you call a man a coward. That's not good.
So, what are the consequences for men and society in general for not living by these tactical virtues? Is it a malaise? Is it bad for? I mean, what do we get out of living these four tactical virtues?
Well, I mean, I think because we are kind of primally set up, primally we're kind of wired to want to display these things. So I think when we don't get an opportunity to do these things, I think, there is a malaise there. There is a little bit of depression, I think. I think a lot of men feel like they're lacking direction and lacking things to do. I mean, we're not really designed to, you see this with boys who are, they get diagnosed as being hyperactive in school.
Yeah.
Because we're not really designed to sit in a chair all day. That's not... that's not what our ancestors did. Some of us are better than others, and they can find their own way through that. But, we're not designed for that. And I think that, while people at kind of the top of society have the opportunities to, they'll sit in, be investment bankers all day and then go climb Everest because they have $1 million to do it.
Yeah.
I think for the mass of us, you're just, creating a society of men that's disengaged because, we're not getting a lot out of being customer service representatives.
Yeah.
That we're not really getting a lot of satisfaction out of what our lives are.
So I want to come back to that, like what we can do, kind of your solution, because you talked about that in the way of the men. But before we get there, I want to talk about one of the virtues a little bit, which is honor. And because you did a really great job, and we actually, we wrote a big series about the history of traditional honor on the site.
I don't know anyone who's done more.
Yeah.
It's good stuff.
Thank you. It was like the hardest thing we've ever written. I mean, it took 7 months, I think. And just for our reader or people who are listening, when we're talking about honor, we're not talking about honor in the modern sense. Because I think most people, when they hear honor, they think, oh, it means integrity, or like, I'm being true to my personal values or whatever.
It means whatever's good.
Yeah, whatever's good. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
You're talking about honor, and we're talking about honor in the traditional sense, what honor was for most of human history and is still what it means in some non-Western cultures. And that's basically what it comes down to is your reputation as a man, right?
Absolutely.
Your reputation, you would say, in living these four tactical virtues. And that would be like the code of honor, right? The code of the way of men is you have to live up to these things. And if you don't live up to these virtues or these attributes, then you have dishonor and you experience shame. Yeah. One thing you talked about in the book that really stuck out to me, and I thought was both funny and interesting, and just a way to describe it, was the opposite of honor. And you call it flamboyant dishonor. What do you mean by flamboyant dishonor? And can you give an example of a man being flamboyantly dishonorable?
Well, as you said, honor is really about caring about your reputation as a man with other men. And I think that, that gets very abstract in a big society.
Yeah.
In a tribal society, it makes a lot of sense. In a big society, well, who is your group? You know, is it everyone? Is it, I mean, cause you can't, you can't care about what everyone thinks. But I think, for the average man, even today, I mean, it's more about what people around you think. What do your friends think? What does your group of men think? I think more importantly, what are the group of men that you want to belong to? Yeah. What do they think? What kind of man that you want to be? That's kind of your group of men. So, I think that, I don't know, like, dishonor means dramatically failing at being what a man means in that group. When we think of a man as being dishonored, we think of him as being ashamed. And, the positive of that is that, the threat of shame and dishonor motivates us to try harder and to do better, to be better men, because we value the opinions of other men. Mm-hmm. And, I think that the opposite of honor is to be shameless about your failures as a man. You're saying, I don't care if you guys don't think that I'm manly. Mm-hmm. And, a lot of people will make that heroic today, but I think that it's kind of a cop out. It's really easy to not care what other men think about you. It's really easy to be like, I'll just do whatever I want and be myself. And, that's not really that rebellious. It's just kind of, it kind of liberates you from having standards. And, so I think that, when you are trying not to be manly, if you're making a big show of it, and I think this is different from saying that, men who are just simply not very manly, I don't think that that's flamboyantly dishonorable. I think that that's just, okay, they're not very manly, but I think what I mean by as the opposite of honor as being flamboyantly dishonorable is men who make a big show of it. Mm. And I think in any group, I mean, if you're running around saying, dressing like a woman or acting like a woman, or, openly rejecting kind of what most men would expect from you and making a big show of it, because you want attention for that, mm-hmm. then I think that's the opposite of honor. You're basically saying, I don't care about being part of this male group. And, I think men are kind of reasonable to kind of mock and shun men who say, hey, I don't care what you think. Yeah. Because it's kind of this kind of passive aggression, really. You're saying, I don't care what you think, really loud. Yeah. So, I mean, why would you want those guys around? It doesn't make any sense. And I think that, men get a lot of flack for ejecting men who don't act like the men in their group should. But, why would you want those guys around? Yeah. And, I think that, another, we can talk about that, in terms of femininity, or you can also talk about, men who go out of their way to reject codes of masculinity in kind of an intellectual way. Mm-hmm. Meaning a lot of feminists who are basically making a big show of saying, I'm a feminist. I care more about what women think than what men think. What men think is stupid, and what women think is good. And so if you're saying that, again, I think that men have every right to be like, yeah, well, you don't want to be part of our group. We hate you. We don't like you. Why would we want you around? Yeah.
And I think it's interesting too, like at the same time, like they're like, they're saying, make it a big deal. Like, okay, I reject this idea of idea of manliness or manhood that you have there. And by doing that, I'm actually more manlier than you. Like sometimes
I know it's so tricky. It's so like they're doing the same thing. It's like they're still trying to be they're still trying to outman us. Yeah. But in rejecting masculinity. So it's like they aren't really even in contradiction with anything I'm saying. Yeah. They're still trying to outman us.
Yeah, and I think it's when guys like they say they don't care about it, but like at the same time you can tell they still do, because they go like you said, they go out of their way of like saying, yeah, I'm more of a man than you because I don't believe this stupid archaic idea of masculinity. And
yeah, I mean, I looked into it like if you look at someone like Michael Kimmel, like he makes this he frames everything that other men do in terms of fear. Yeah. Like I think I wrote a quote from him the other day about saying that the primary emotion of manliness is anxiety, because you can never be good enough.
Yeah.
And well, that is true because that's what standards are. At the same time, he becomes heroic in framing other men as being fearful, because he's conquered his fear, where really he's just being himself, but there are a lot of guys like that who want to make you believe that they've conquered their fear and are manlier than you because they don't care about being manly, which is kind of funny.
Yeah. And like shame is bad. That's another thing too. Like any type of shame is like toxic. I mean, I guess I could say there's like some type of shame I can see like, okay, yeah, you shouldn't really feel bad about that. But there's like certain things you got to have standards. Like you're saying, like you got to live up to that. And it's okay to experience some shame because shame compels you to improve yourself. Right.
Yeah.
That's why we evolved that feeling. And like, it seems like a lot of these guys too are just like, they're kind of shifting the goalpost of masculinity or manhood.
Absolutely.
Like they still want to be considered a man or masculine or whatever, but they can't live up to that standard that maybe of strength or being courageous or having mastery. So they just tweak it a little and say, okay, being a man or being manly means this. And, but like you're moving the goalpost forward. So it's not that impressive.
Yeah, no, it's a Nietzschean resentment. You're taking the strong and making it weak, and the weak and making it strong. So,
yeah. All right. So great stuff. I mean, definitely people need to read that. Some great insights about honor there. So, okay, you mentioned earlier that most of these guys are working as clerks or doing information entry at a cubicle. And
welcome to Walmart. We love you.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Idiocracy. Yeah. And as I read this book, like, it definitely like it stirs something with you. Like, man, that is like, I want to do this. Like, this is awesome. But at the same time, you're like, wait a minute. Like you realize that modern Western society isn't very friendly to these tactical virtues anymore. In fact, we go out of our way to sort of sometimes punish it, like you said, like in some cases, but at the best sort of diminish them. So is it possible to live the tactical virtues of manliness in our modern culture?
Well, we can do the best we can. It's absolutely correct to say that, modern Western modernity is at odds with tactical masculinity because it is. Basically, our level of civilization means outsourcing the job of working on the perimeter as a fighting man. Mm-hmm. That we outsource that to very, very, very tiny percentage of men. Whereas, if we were in smaller groups, a larger percentage of us would have that job.
Yeah.
But in this giant, as global group now, I think the UN actually has done its first real mission as its own army, which is kind of creepy. but as a global group, there's only this tiny class of men who are going to be allowed to do this. And it's even in the military, it's only like a percentage of a percentage of a percentage.
Yeah.
Who even get to, ever shoot at anyone, So it really is at odds. And so I think in a society where everyone's kind of on the same page, I think, that gets channeled into things like sports and so forth. But even that's becoming increasingly stigmatized. And so we're like, getting in a smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller box. And I don't really see any way to change that without kind of refiguring what society is. So, I mean, I think.
Yeah, sort of like wiping the slate clean in some ways. I mean, you have to do that.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, I just don't see a way out because I think that, our society is kind of run by big money.
Yeah.
And nothing is more disruptive to big money than angry young men.
Yeah.
Men who are running around creating trouble, being tribal, doing their thing. That's very disruptive. And, supply chains get messed with and, people make less profit and we wouldn't want that.
Yeah.
So, as long as, we kind of still organize our society by this kind of giant financialized globalist mess, I think that masculinity will actually be increasingly stigmatized.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I get interviewed a lot by reporters and podcasts, and they always ask me like, "What's wrong with men today?" And they're looking for like a pretty short answer, like, "Oh, it's feminism," or it's like it's the economy, or it's video games. I mean, they want something, right?
It's all of those things.
Yeah, it's like really, it's like modern life.
Yeah.
It's like modern Western society has done it, and yeah, it's just these virtues, like you said, aren't applicable in this life. And I think it's interesting that, lately there's been this like appeal and draw to like end of world things and like zombies and like The Walking Dead. And like you watch those movies and like those things that you talk about in your book, mastery, courage, strength, like those are the things that keep people alive. And people are obsessed with it. Like they want a zombie apocalypse, right? I mean, there's tons of
it's like everybody's secret popular fantasy now.
Yeah. And I think it's because a lot of guys feel like I want to be able to experience that, right? Like I want to experience those primal virtues or attributes inside of me.
One day as a lion.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
What's that one quote? Like, every man like wants to lift the black flag and like slit throats or something. Like there's some.
Yeah. It's a Mencken quote. Yeah.
I think that's kind of. I think every guy's got that in him a little bit.
A little bit.
Yeah. Okay. So this is kind of related. You talk about. I thought it was a really funny description. But it kind of, I think does a good job of describing what Western society is like, is the Bonobos Masturbation Society. What do you mean by that? And how has the Bonobos Masturbation Society been detrimental to the way of men?
Well, as we discussed, there aren't really a lot of outlets for masculinity in modern culture. And so, everything we do is kind of simulated. It's a simulated version in the way that masturbation is simulation of sex. Mm-hmm. What we do, all of our forms of masculinity are kind of simulated. Sports is a simulation of war.
Yeah.
I mean, everything we do is kind of, we don't really do it because we need to do it. We do it because it makes us feel good.
Yeah.
So, I mean, like, we can go out and learn how to hunt, but we don't have to.
Yeah.
And we can learn how to fight, but we'll probably never have to. Mm-hmm. And so everything is very masturbatory. And so like to really experience authentic masculinity, you really need that, that need to do it. There has to be like this overwhelming need, you have to feel like your role is actually necessary because everything outside of that is just you basically playing a video game of life.
Yeah.
And that's what we're all doing. I think, as much as, we try to prepare ourselves for possibly the zombie apocalypse, until the zombies rise from the dead, we're still left with, okay, I'm just going outside and playing with guns now, so, I mean, I think that, and I think we all know that, and I think it's kind of depressing. And I think, it's, I think a lot of men just, have a hard time dealing with that. It becomes like, what's the point?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, there's a real lack of that. And I think that, if we broke up into smaller societies in some way, I think that life would become a lot more meaningful. Our society is always, organized around longer life and more people and more consumption and all that. But I think that, smaller is better, I think, for men in many cases.
Yeah, I totally agree, because that's something I've been thinking a lot about lately, is the idea of, and I think this kind of relates to my next question, because you argue that the way of men is the way of the gang. That's a pretty loaded phrase, because people think, oh, gangs are bad. But what do you mean by that? Because I think you have it kind of really ties in with what you've been talking about. What do you mean by the way of men is the way of the gang?
Well, I mean, it's obviously meant to be a little bit controversial.
Sure.
But I mean, really, this idea of what we've been talking about, the tactical virtues and this survival gang, and I think the way of men are what manliness is really defined by what that survival gang needs, and has needed throughout history and whatever. And you see that in areas where the state is weak, or, which could be an inner city ghetto, mm-hmm. or it could be, Africa, mm-hmm. or Brazil, or, men start to break into gangs. And then all of a sudden, they are living that primal role again. And I don't mean to say that I think that that's going to be pretty. I don't think that that's ever pretty. I mean, I think that, that can get, that means people are going to get hurt for no reason. It means, a lot of things that are not ideal. But then again, it's like, I think we're missing, as we were talking about, I think we're missing our narrative of life that kind of gives us a sense of meaning. And, without that struggle, manliness is kind of masturbatory. And so, I mean, if you look at areas like Mexico, all of a sudden you have, gangs rule large portions of Mexico. And then you'll have, community gangs where because the police aren't really worth anything. And so you have gangs of, guys who just want to protect their families standing up to the big gangs. Yeah. And so, it doesn't necessarily have to be destructive, innately. It can be, as we would say, men who are good men, standing up as gangs. But, I think that, The Walking Dead does a really good job of handling the fact that the more survival becomes a question, the more morality becomes an issue. And it becomes almost this kind of Machiavellian situation where I can only care about our tribe. Yeah. One of the biggest problems with modernity is that is universal morality. And there's no way to be universally good to everybody. Yeah. You have to sooner or later make choices about my people, your people, my family, your family, and do what's best for the people who you've chosen to align yourself with. And so that's your gang. Yeah. To a certain extent.
Okay. So, guys who are listening to their podcast are like, man, yeah, I feel this. Like I want that, something like they're listening to this. Like, yeah, I want to experience the way of man. Like I totally resonate with that. Tired of my desk job. What can these guys do right now to start living the way of men? I mean, just sort of like small things that it's tough. Like we talked about, it's sort of like a catch-22. We live in modern society where these attributes aren't welcome. But what can they do to start experience it, but not in the masturbatory way? That's the catch, I guess, right?
Well, I guess it's always kind of in a masturbatory way. Until there's a gun to your head, it's always kind of a masturbatory way. But I think that a start, and I get this question a lot. I mean, a start, like, how do I change? Yeah. I think, I understand what you're saying is right, but how do I change? And I think that the first step in many cases is just, a lot of these guys don't have a lot of male friends. And I think that's really important. I mean, if you put men in a group, the way of the gang happens. Yeah. That hierarchy starts to form and you get those kind of interactions, and it's an organic thing because it's the most natural thing in the world. But, you have to get men in a group with just men, and then all that happens. So I think that, striving to create a situation where that can happen is something you want to look for. And I also think that, if you see men, as we were talking about, men who, I want to be a little bit like that, you got to spend more time with that guy. Yeah. Because it'll rub off. Yeah. There's this guy at this powerlifting gym that I was going to about a year ago. And he just has everything together. Dude sets world records in lifting. He runs a business, owns a gym, has a wife, has kids, builds cars in his off time. Yeah. He's just got it together. Yeah. He's really he's just a better human being than I am. Uh-huh. And, like whenever I got to be around him, it's like, I want to absorb that vibe. Yeah. I want to be more like that guy. And I think that, we have to, that's what you want to do. I mean, you want to surround yourself with men who aren't the men who are maybe always beneath you, who are going to flatter your ego, but maybe the men who are more like you want to be. Yeah.
I think that's a lot. I think that's like a tough thing because I think our society encourages like the opposite of like surrounding yourself with like people beneath you because you want to satisfy that ego.
Well, everyone likes to have their ego stroked.
Yeah. So I guess it takes some humility to say like, I'm not as manly as I want to be, here's what I got to do if I want to be like that.
I think humility is a good virtue for men to have.
For sure. So here's a bonus question, because I'd like to, it's kind of more for me personally, but I'm sure all your readers would be interested too. So you've written and done a lot of research about masculinity. Are there any books you recommend in particular that guys pick up to gain more insight into the way of men?
Well, gosh, I think your reading list is ahead of mine, but I think we've read a lot of the same books.
Yeah, I think so.
A lot of our talk about honor, I think it was informed by James Bowman's book on honor. I think that was a really important book. I really like the book Shop Class as Soulcraft.
Oh yeah, I wrote a post about that last week.
Oh yeah. No, that's really good at taking apart modernity and work and kind of the meaningless of it for us and for everyone, really. This lack of agency that we have. I think that'll really get people thinking in the similar direction. Let me see here. Just kind of looking at my bookshelf. I dug out a book. If you want to look at the way feminism deals with men, and if you really want to kind of have laid bare the same messages that we get every day, I dug out a book from the 70s called The 49% Majority. And it's something that Michael Kimmel cites all the time. Yeah. In every book that he's ever written. And it basically, and I wrote about it a little bit in my kind of free ebook that I have called No Man's Land. But if you look at the messages that we get from the modern media every day, and I have a Google alert set up for masculinity, and every time it is mentioned, it is about reimagining masculinity and how we can change masculinity and everything. There's almost nothing good ever said about masculinity in mainstream media. And it's all these messages that we get every day were really written about in the 70s in this book, The 49% Majority. It was kind of one of the first pro-feminist male books out there, and written by men about their kind of anger with their baby boomers, writing about their anger with their kind of World War II dads who were too mean to them and whatever. And it's all this kind of anger that these guys had. And I think it really captures it. It captures how emotional it is. Yeah. Because now it's been refined and the message has been kind of refined and adopted by the UN and all kinds of things. But, it really captures this kind of just raw, my dad was mean to me and therefore masculinity is dumb. Yeah.
And I'm going to my room.
Exactly. So, I think that's a really big eye opener. It's not reprinted. You have to get vintage copies, but it's out there. And I think it's kind of a real eye opener if you want to look at what the media is saying and see where it comes from.
Interesting stuff. Okay. I'll have to check that. I haven't read that, so I'll have to check it out. Yeah. If Michael Kimmel quotes it all the time, then.
Oh, yeah.
It must be good, right? All right, man. Well, Jack, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Thanks so much. I recommend my readers go out and pick up the book. Some very interesting insights. You might not agree with everything, but Jack's going to make you think when you read this book, and that's awesome. So, Jack, thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Our guest today was Jack Donovan. Jack is the author of the book, The Way of Men, and you can find that on Amazon.com. Well, that wraps up another edition of the Art of Manliness podcast. For more manly tips and advice, make sure to check out the Art of Manliness website at artofmanliness.com. And until next time, stay manly.